Welcome back to Money in Motion, the show that makes sure you know what's happening in the financial world.
Exactly.
I'm your host.
And I'm Susan.
And with me again is Susan, who is an expert at making sense of all the complicated stuff in the economy.
Glad to be here.
And today's topic is a tough one. We're going to be taking a look at the terrible wildfires happening all across Los Angeles.
Yes.
But we're going to be focusing on the money side of things.
Yeah.
We're using information from BBC News and Yahoo Finance to figure out how these natural disasters end up affecting the economy, across the whole country.
Yeah. What's really interesting is how these fires, they're obviously awful for people, but they also show us the weak points and things we usually just take for granted, like insurance, utilities, even the stock market.
Yeah, you're right. Imagine an area twice as big as Manhattan, just completely burned. That's what's going on in LA now. The Palisades fire is the biggest one they've ever had. And BBC News has some really sad stories. They say over 10,000 buildings are gone, totally destroyed. And it's not just buildings. They talk about a family who owned a beat and tackle shop, a cafe that everyone loved, even the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center, all gone.
It's a tough reminder that behind those huge numbers, like over $135 billion in damages, according to Yahoo Finance, there are real people and communities going through something terrible.
Absolutely. And all this financial trouble isn't just hurting the people who are directly affected. Yahoo Finance shows us that insurance companies are really feeling the pressure. Big names like Allstate Travelers Companies and Chubb are seeing their stock prices drop.
Right.
And Mercury General Corporation, which does a lot of business in California, is being hit even harder.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call for the whole industry. It shows how vulnerable they are to these wildfires that are happening more often and getting worse. And climate change is definitely playing a part.
Right.
California is already having trouble finding enough insurance companies to do business there, and this will probably make it even harder.
Right.
Just think about what happens if insurance gets way more expensive, or if it's even harder to get coverage, especially for people in places that are at higher risk for fires.
It's like a chain reaction. And utility companies aren't safe either. Edison International, the company that owns Southern California Edison, is under a lot of scrutiny. Their stock has dropped almost 19% in just a week. Investors are worried about how much money they might have to pay if it turns out their equipment started the fires.
Right.
And then there's PG&E in Northern California, which had to declare bankruptcy in 2019 because of all the money they owed for wildfire damage.
Yeah.
They called it the first climate change bankruptcy. And it makes you wonder how these companies that we all need can survive when the risks from climate change are just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Before we get any deeper into that, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Money in Motion for more deep dives into how what's happening in the world affects your money. Okay, now back to LA, where things are definitely still developing.
Right. The PG&E thing is kind of scary, right? It shows that even the really big companies can get wiped out by the cost of these wildfires that are getting worse and worse.
Yeah, it's definitely worrying.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about what could happen to Southern California Edison and how it would affect the whole state. Imagine what would happen if a big utility company like that just couldn't handle the money problems.
Yeah, it would be a huge problem. A utility company that's struggling with money wouldn't be able to do important things like make their systems better, come up with ways to prevent fires, and switch to cleaner energy sources. All those things are important to make sure this doesn't keep happening.
Right. It sounds kind of depressing. Wildfires use up resources, make it harder to stop them from happening again, and then just make things more likely to burn in the future. It's like a never-ending cycle.
Exactly. And that's why we need to be doing more to prevent these fires, instead of just waiting for them to happen and then trying to fix things.
So what would that look like? What can we actually do to break that cycle?
Well, one important thing is to focus on stopping fires before they even start and making sure they don't get too big if they do. That means doing things like clearing brush around houses, managing forests better, and making sure buildings are built in a way that makes them less likely to catch fire.
Those sound like good ideas, but they probably cost a lot of money. Wouldn't it be hard to pay for all that after a huge disaster like this?
You're right about that, but think of it as an investment, not just spending money. Stopping fires before they start is a lot cheaper than trying to fix everything after they happen.
That's a good point. What about insurance companies? What can they do to make things more stable?
That's a tricky one. Remember, insurance companies are businesses. They want to make money, and they need to manage risk. These bigger and more frequent wildfires make things hard for them. They have to decide whether to raise prices to cover the extra risk or just stop insuring people in areas that are more likely to burn.
Neither of those options sounds very good. Higher prices would be tough for homeowners, and less coverage would leave them with less protection. It's like a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, it's a tough situation with no easy answers. But maybe insurance companies could work more closely with communities and the government. If they all work together to prevent fires, it could make a big difference.
So being proactive and working together instead of just reacting to disasters,
Yeah,
it sounds like a better way to do things.
exactly. It's about preventing risks instead of just dealing with crises. And that reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the fact that it's not supposed to rain anytime soon. BBC News mentioned this, and it's definitely something to worry about. If everything stays dry, the risk of fires is still really high.
Yeah, it's scary to think about. So for those of us in California or other places where wildfires happen a lot, what should we be doing? Should we panic and move to places that don't burn as much?
Panicking never helps. But I do think it's important for people to understand the risks and take steps to be prepared. That means having a plan for what to do if you need to evacuate, making sure your insurance is up to date, and doing those things we talked about to make your property less likely to catch fire.
It sounds like knowing what to do is really important in this situation. The more we understand the risks and how to deal with them, the better off we'll be.
Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive, to help you understand the connection between natural disasters and the financial stuff. It's not just about knowing what's happening, it's about giving you the information you need to make smart decisions and take action.
Speaking of taking action, if you're finding this discussion helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to Money in Motion. We're here to break down complicated financial stuff and make it easy for everyone to understand.
So let's get back to the aftermath of these awful wildfires. We've talked about the immediate costs, the long-term worries, and some possible solutions. But there's another important thing we haven't really talked about yet, the emotional and psychological impact of going through something so traumatic.
That's a really important point. We've been talking about the financial cost, but we can't forget about the human cost, the trauma, the stress, and the sadness of losing your home, your job, and sometimes even people you love. Those are things that hurt way more than any financial report can show.
No, it's easy to focus on the numbers and the economic side of things, but we got to remember that behind every number is a person, a family dealing with loss, a whole community trying to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, and that brings up the idea of resilience. How do people and communities bounce back after something this bad happens? What does recovery even mean when so much has been lost?
That's a question that goes beyond just money. It's about how strong people are, how communities come together, and how we can still have hope even when things are really tough. And it's not just, feel-good stuff. Studies show that having strong connections with other people is super important for being resilient after a disaster. Having family, friends, neighbors who can help you out, give you support, or just listen when you need to talk, that's what makes a difference.
It makes sense. It's that feeling of not being alone, knowing other people, understand what you're going through. That can make all the difference in the world.
Right. Community support helps people deal with the trauma and the stress. It gives them a sense of belonging and helps them start to rebuild their lives.
So what about the role of the government and other organizations? What can they do to help people recover and become more resilient in the long term?
It's important for them to respond well to the disaster. That means giving people places to stay, food, medical care, and money to help them rebuild. But it also means dealing with the long-term problems, like providing mental health services, helping businesses get back on their feet, and investing in stronger infrastructure that can handle future disasters.
So it sounds like a multi-pronged approach, taking care of the immediate needs and also addressing the long-term challenges of rebuilding lives and communities.
Exactly. It's about creating a safety net for the people who have been hurt, while also creating conditions that will allow individuals and communities to thrive over time.
So looking beyond these specific wildfires in California,
Yeah.
what are the bigger lessons we can learn from this? What do we need to be thinking about for the future?
Well, I think it shows us how urgent it is to address climate change. These wildfires are a wake-up call. They show us what happens when the planet gets warmer, and we can expect to see more extreme weather in the future.
It's a scary thought, and it really highlights the need to do something about climate change and prepare for its effects. If we don't, we're just setting ourselves up for more disasters.
Exactly. And it's just as important to build our resilience both as individuals and as a society. That means putting money into preventing and managing fires, building strong connections in our communities, and supporting policies that address climate change and prepare for disasters.
It's a call to action. We can't just sit around and wait for the next disaster. We need to be working toward a future where we're better prepared for these challenges.
You got it. And even though these wildfires have been awful, they've also shown us how strong people can be.
It reminds us that even when terrible things happen, there's always hope. There's always the possibility of starting over and rebuilding. And with that, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the many ways the California wildfires are affecting us.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the immediate financial impact to the long-term problems and the signs of hope in how people are bouncing back.
If you found this discussion helpful, please like and subscribe to Money in Motion for more deep dives into the financial forces shaping our world.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.